Hello, everyone. Welcome to Driving the Business of Science podcast. I'm Keith Parent. I am the CEO of Windshire Group and RegDocs 365. And our goal with this podcast is to talk about the business aspect of drug development and bringing new products to market. Let me give you a little bit about Windshire first, and I'll talk to you about our guest for today. Windshire Group has been around for about 30 years. We are a managed service company. We manage IT infrastructure for life science companies. What does that mean? That's basically the back office type stuff, the big servers in the back rooms running the clinical trials, running all the safety systems, all the things that people think about when they're doing drug development. We also have RegDocs 365, which is a content repository hosting both clinical and regulatory content. We use it for a whole bunch of different things, and we actually have a bunch of AI tools built in now because I think there's a lot of content that's locked up within documents within different repositories. Today, we're going to be talking about quality, and in particular, we're going to be talking with Mr. James Blackwell, the president and CEO of the Windshire Group. And I've had the pleasure of working with James for a number of years on a number of projects. And it's my pleasure to introduce James. And James, you give us a little bit of a background on yourself, Dr. Blackwell, if you would. That would be awesome. And then we can get into some questions.
Absolutely, Keith. And thanks for the invitation to be an honored guest on your podcast. What I've always appreciated about you, Keith, is you've been such a visionary to the industry. I'm sure you're one of the first people that are talking about the cloud in conjunction with what this industry does. And I know you were talking about AI at least a couple of years before everyone else started talking about it. So I formed Windshire after being a number of operating companies, Repligen, Genzyme, and then I headed up Site Tech Ops group at AbbVie for the launch of Humira. Then I went into consulting, launched Windshire in 2011. We've consulted on all stages of the product lifecycle, virtual companies to multinationals. And we cover all the major modalities. And I think that's really important for us for several reasons. One, many of our clients are developing multiple modalities. It's not unusual to see a company with an antibody and a small molecule in their pipeline. Also, we do a lot of work for investors. They tend to be modality agnostic. They're just more interested in making money. And I think the third third reason is the fact that when you're doing a risk-based approach, it's important to apply the technical aspect of the things to do that risk and science-based approach, and that's something that we're very good at. So we're predominantly focused on CMC throughout that life cycle. So it's the quality, manufacturing, and process development of those things, and there are some closely allied areas to that wouldn't strictly call CMC because they don't go into your regulatory filings. I think the fourth reason why it's important to be modality agnostic is we're now seeing modalities that actually combine those things, such as cell and gene therapy with antibodies and ADCs with antibodies and small molecules. So that's just a little bit of background in terms of who we are. And we started out on a consent decree when I formed a group. So quality has always been a core to who we are. And that's the topic for today, Keith.
Excellent. So as we talk about quality, and I know quality is very important to most organizations, talk to me a little bit about, explain a little bit first actually on the modality that you just brought up, and talk a little bit about what modalities are so that people understand the different things. You talked about small molecules, biotech, things like that. Could you just kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of major modalities, I would break it down into biologics. And those can be different things, cell and gene therapy, vaccines, antibodies, peptides, small molecules. Those are typically oral dosage forms, and that could include antibiotics, but most of the oral dosage medications that we're used to, Keith. Cell and gene therapy, personalized medicines, that is really getting to be a very diverse type of field. ADCs, antibody drug conjugates, that's taking a potent molecule, combining it with antibody, and then an antibody goes out, looks for its target, and delivers the payload, typically in cancer to kill the cancer. So makes it very interesting stay on top of all this, Keith, and makes
That's
the job
fantastic.
fun. Yeah.
So as we talk about quality and when we deal with quality at a Court Square perspective, we're usually dealing with IT quality. So we're usually dealing with SOPs about how we run the computer systems, all that kind of stuff. But I've worked with you for a number of years, and the quality we've talked about has really been at a whole different level. It's the quality of the inside the labs, the CLIA labs, or other areas. Talk a little bit more about how quality is kind of invested throughout the life science world and how we have to really focus in on that.
Well, it's everywhere. I mean, in terms of ensuring patient safety, it's obviously in all the GXP things that we do. It has to be embedded there. And it's important for several reasons. One, it's always about protecting patient safety and making sure they get the efficacious product that they want, and it can expect that. In many cases, it can be life-changing or even life-saving. So it's very important to deliver on that. But I also like to think of quality in a larger context and not just focused on the compliance aspect of it. Because if you look at other industries like Toyota, they take a very broad view of quality. And that's important because it can impact operational excellence and cost of goods. And that can be impacted both from the GXP side, and I'll talk more about that later. But taking that holistic view makes your organization more efficient and, in the end, more likely to deliver a quality product in the end.
That's fantastic. So tell me a little bit about how does compliance equate to quality? I know we always have to deal with compliance. I have to deal with it. You have to deal with it. Talk to that about how that kind of drives that quality.
Well, it's very important because you don't want to be non-compliant. But what I would say is there's not a perfect correlation. What do I mean by that? Compliance is making sure you're checking those boxes that you need to, so that when health authorities see you, they can say, yep, you've done this, 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 and this, and you're good to go. The fact is, though, there's not a perfect correlation there, and it's possible to go too far over that line and try to be too compliant. And what can happen is you create sort of a monster, quality system with checks and balances with a lot of things that aren't adding value or improving patient outcomes because they're really not reducing risk and they're really not important to delivering that quality product. And what you've done is you've diverted resources away from where they are because of all this endless compliance type of thing. And the best example I have for that, so one of my graduate school buddies became head of old quality for Amgen. And he used to visit different sites and he would say, we have to walk the line. So using that Johnny Cash line, walk the line. And when you first hear that, you might think, oh, he's talking about what is it that we can get away with? Absolutely not. It was the opposite message. So there's a couple things, important things I think they're embedded in that. First, one, we have to understand where that line is. That's very important. In many cases, it's very clear. It's encoded in the CFR. We know exactly where that line is and what we need to do. In many cases, in terms of implementing systems to be both effective and efficient, there could be some gray areas, right? There's always those things there. So the organization has to define where is that line so that we can be effective and efficient. And we don't want to go too far over that line because it's going to be very costly. It's going to impact our quality systems. And we're probably not going to be producing a quality product because we're spending a lot of money and time, running around doing stuff that really doesn't have an impact that's not important, and in fact can create problems.
Right. When I think a lot about compliance or quality and how we have to deal with stuff like that, a lot of times I'll be talking to my quality guys and they say, well, we can't do that or we can't do it. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Don't tell me what I can't do. Tell me how I can do it, but stay compliant. Because there's always I think a big part of things in the FDA from a business perspective, they don't want to put so much quality in that you can't run a business because what good is that? Then the price of everything is so expensive. But at the same time, I should be able to do something and say I'm going to do it, but then I got to follow it. So I think the old adage of, say what you're going to do and then do what you say. And that's where we come into compliance of making sure we're documenting everything. So we have that documentation, because a big part of the FDA is that, if you say you're doing it, you got to show me that you're doing it. If you can't show me, then you never did it. Right. So I think that's a big thing that we deal with a lot. how should organizations think about quality systems, particularly electronic quality systems, and dealing with those?
Yeah, it's when I'm asked about that, I like to quote or paraphrase Einstein, where he said a model should be as simple as possible, or not one bit simpler. So it's really building on that theme I was talking about, Keith, is that you want to start simple. We've helped many organizations put in their initial quality system. And in fact, I think it's perfectly fine, and probably the best solution is to start with paper or electronic equivalent of paper and using SharePoint, to do that. I know we've worked with you in the past with clients to do things like that. Then what's important is later, as you mature, you better move away from paper. In fact, I know we've had a mutual client, and I advise them early on, look, start with paper, but you better think about how you transition to that electronic system, because if you stay in paper, you're dead. You're not going to be able to run a cell and gene therapy operation running around with paper, from needle to needle. It will kill you. So, integrating that system in digital transformation and then incorporating that into your quality system is something you need to be strategic about from the beginning, and think about how you're going to do that. How get people to bring those systems in, so that quality system is the most effective one that you have, but it's also communicating and talking to your other systems so that you can, anticipate problems, react to problems quickly and solve those problems quickly. Those are very important aspects. So, thinking of your quality system not only as, the electronic quality management system, picking one that's appropriate for you, but also one that's going to allow your organization to work seamlessly with the data and information that everyone in the organization needs in order to drive quality.
Well, and I think from an electronic perspective too, the more data we're collecting, and we're always collecting data all the time. The AI systems that I talked a little bit earlier about, the ability to use AI to go back and look at some of your old data, things like that. How tough is that when you're doing paper-based systems? You really can't do that. So the reality is you've got to have it in there, even if it's the point. I was talking to recently one of a third-party logistics company that we're dealing with, and they're getting in bills of lading in paper, and they've got all this stacks of paper. And our goal was, let's take all that paper and let's at least scan it in, and then have an OCR engine that can read through it and then store it electronically so that we can actually search through it and tie it back to the order entry system, things like that. So those are a lot of areas where we think a lot about quality and how it. Talk to me about some of the challenges of quality. I know there's lots of them, and
Well, Keith,
everybody gets kind of anxious about quality.
Keith, if it's okay, if we could pause on that, I'd like to add a comment to what you were talking to about AI, and then tee that question up. Not much surprises me about this industry, but it's actually surprised me how fast the industry is adopting AI. And it's not just on the clinical side and some of the things you're talking about and working with especially, but on the GMP side of things. We've had those conversations and we're starting to do some things in that area. It's actually surprised me of how fast the industry is adopting it and interested in adopting it in order to get more efficient and hopefully drive quality. There's clearly some challenges there, but it's definitely going to have a big impact on our industry, Keith.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And I think that I think what has to happen is as people start to implement some of these systems, all of a sudden it opens their mind to, oh, well, if I can do it there, how can I do it over here? So I think that's a great place. And they have to see it in action, because, it's crazy, but people can't really visualize some of the things it could potentially do for them. We as a company really go after just what are the most mundane things that people do over and over and over again. How do we automate some of that stuff? How can we use AI to help just have us stop doing that? I'd rather have people doing something that's more in tune with what their training is and where their, what their intellectual ability is, versus just manual effort of cutting and pasting things and doing stuff like that. It makes no sense to me. So let's get back to that question. What do you think of the challenges? Speaking of challenges, what are some of the challenges to quality that you're seeing out there?
Well, some of those I think pretty generic and long-standing. I think a challenge for any organization, Keith, is getting the entire organization on the quality train. That really starts with senior leadership. But, I really enjoy working with organizations where, the head of manufacturing says, hey, I'm with the head of quality, we're working together. Quality starts in my organization. I take responsibility for it. And you see that throughout the organization. And that's an organization that's taking it really seriously. So it's sort of a cultural thing that can be within an organization, but really starts at that senior leadership level. They really need to understand it's important. And not just viewing the quality unit as an expense item on the ledger, because I'll actually probably get a chance to get to this later. But quality can have a very tremendous positive impact on your organization. So you really have to have senior leadership, I think, aligned around that and really push that down throughout the organization. I think some smaller areas where I see consistently challenges, really fully assessing the impact for events within the facility, and doing a proper impact assessment on what that might be. I think change control is always a challenge for organizations throughout their life cycle, and it can be hard to get on top of that as a young organization that's starting out. My favorite example there, Keith, had a client that was starting up and just doing clinical manufacturing. They had equipment they used in process development, and they were like, hey, well, we don't have to worry about GMP so much for those early clinical stages. So let's pull the equipment over that we've been using and use that to produce this clinical material. And so they produced some clinical material, they put it on test, and guess what? It came up hot for lead. They're like, oh my gosh, how's lead getting into this? So this is one great example of why we have layers of protection within our industry. So what happened is those earlier things weren't in place, like change control. So they went and used equipment. And what happened? They traced it down to a piece of equipment that was like a sieve that a lead solder had been used in. So when they were processing, that lead was leaching out, getting into the product. Unfortunately, they were testing for it and they caught it. So that's another example why you can't test quality into a product. You don't want to rely on that because you might not be testing for something that could be a problem. There was actually a problem in equipment they were using to produce that material, Keith.
In our case, I've worked in this industry for over 30 years, and it's funny when you talk to other consultants, you'll talk about different big pharma companies or other companies that we've all worked at, and all of a sudden you're talking about one company and you start to talk about how quality is overboard here, and they go, "Oh, I know that company. We worked with them," and it's just ridiculous how much extra work that they do. I don't know how they ever get any work done, and so immediately you start to think about, okay, what is fit for purpose? And we talk about fit for purpose all the time. The same thing can be said for quality. How do we put the right quality in place that's meaningful without going so overboard that you can't get your work done? And I think that's important. I've worked at places where we've had a quality person who just doesn't trust anybody, and they make you do things over and over and over again. And again, it's to the point where the amount of work effort is way beyond what it should be to show the minimal quality aspects or the minimal increase in quality that you might get by pushing like buttons like that. So I think it's kind of crazy. One of the things that we hear about a lot about in our industry is the concept of 483 letters or 43 observations. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's treated from a compliance perspective?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously a serious thing if you get a warning letter. So, warning letter or serious 483s, and I'll elaborate more on the Form 483 aspect in a moment. The most important advice is to, one, take it seriously. If you have a warning letter, one, that means that you're, one step from a consent decree. And having worked on a consent decree, I can assure you, it's not something you want your organization to get into. It could mean the end of your organization, and to get out of it, it's going to be extremely expensive because, in essence, the FDA has control over your facility, and the remediation around that can be very, very expensive and take quite a while to get out of that. So, the other mistake is when you have those Form 483s, a warning letter, is just treating it like a checklist or a punch list to say, okay, well, the FDA saw this, so we fix those things, we're going to be good. That's not the case, because most likely there were systemic reasons why you got to that place anyhow. So, and the FDA actually acknowledges this in the wording that they use in those letters. They'll say, look, this was just a point in time. We probably didn't uncover everything that could be an issue at your organization. So if you really want to fix those problems, you really have to look at the systemic reasons that were behind them, why they happened in the first place. And that's often why the FDA will often say you need to bring in a third party or consultant to help you with those issues. Because if you had the quality organization that was, experienced, fit for purpose, given the appropriate authority that they have, need, and so forth, you probably wouldn't have gotten into that situation anyhow. And your quality system is probably has some real problems with it. So, my advice to there is to bring those expertise in and help you fix those kinds of problems. And that can give you and bring in an organization that's not focused on billable hours, but on your business outcomes, and that could be very helpful to you. And I'll give you an example of why it's important to take these kinds of things seriously. So when I was working for AbbVie, we had a contamination issue that had a high probability of delaying the approval for Humira, Keith. So I did that investigation. I defended that issue for 4 days before Kurt Borson and his team. And at some point, the head of all biologics was AbbVie was so fed up with it. I remember he stood out in the hallway, Keith, and he said, "I never want to hear that word in this facility ever again." So anyhow, I was successful. We didn't delay Humira because of that excellent investigation and the root cause I put in place, Keith. Frankly, I don't think many people would have come up with that root cause. So it was really important because I gave an ISP talk lately, and I did the calculation of what the NPV value of not delaying Humira for a year was, because we didn't do an investigation, didn't know what was going on. By the time we figured it out, produced enough runs to show we had the process in control, run through the FDA again, blah, 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 blah. That would have been about a year. Keith, without accounting for inflation or any competitive effects like delays or biosimilars coming in and competing with Humira at the end, even not considering those things, it was over $8.5 billion that was saved to AbbVie.
That's incredible.
So, I'd rather have, and one of the things Kurt Borson pointed out in terms of Form 483s that stuck with me, he said, look, 483s can be a parking ticket or go to jail for life. And he was, right about that. So not all 483s are created equal. I'd rather have 5 minors than 1 serious, observation for sure. So,
don't you think that one of the things that people don't realize is that the FDA as an organization has the power to actually shut you down, right? I mean, the reality is, people talk about HIPAA violations and things like that, and you may get a fine here and there. But when they walk into your place and they put the locks on the door, you don't work anymore.
Some FDA officers carry guns, and I've heard stories about that. And I've known people who've been on those FDA visits as an observer when they were shutting a facility down. So yeah, they do have that jurisdiction and power. And so yeah, it's something to be taken very seriously. But back to that story, I can tell you in terms of not hearing that word, I've asked people very recently if that word was ever heard in that facility ever again. Not only that facility, Keith, but I think it's well known that Humira went to processing plants around the world. That word was never heard in that facility or anywhere globally ever again. That I'm pretty sure of, because I've talked to people that should know that. So I'm very, very proud of that, Keith.
That's great. That's great. So we're going to wrap up shortly, but what are some of the best practices as you put quality first, and we can kind of wrap up things from there?
Yeah, well, thanks, Keith. Yeah, I mean, it touches on some of the themes we've talked about, is really having that entire organization on the same page. Focuses on doing things as simply and but as effectively as possible. Making sure your quality system is fit for purpose, like we've talked about, and don't let it get too far down the road where it becomes so complex. Then to unwind that, it's a problem. I mean, one of the projects we had was a company thought was going to go commercial, put a commercial system in, and then they wanted to retract that and go back to the simpler system. My advice then is don't try to retract it. Just kind of throw that one out and start over and put that other system in. Think about quality beyond compliance, like we talked about, and look at the bigger picture. Lean systems are ones that produce less problems. So really combining that operational excellence and looking at things holistically is really important. And a great story I have there is with a client. We were visiting a facility in India for business reasons, but we got a tour of the facility and the labs. And while we were doing that, they were very good about answering our questions and so forth. And we made a number of observations. And so even though it was for a business purpose, coming out of that, the client had an Excel spreadsheet with all the observations that we made. They classified them in terms of risk, and then they classified those in terms of the impact, if they were to partner with this organization, going forward. And that was it was really well done, very impressive. It just shows how they embedded risk management into the culture, into their system, because ultimately those kinds of business things can impact the actual quality of the product produced later. Listen to your quality unit, elevate them so they have the authority to do, what they need to get done. Think about, one of the things I didn't talk about was Amgen put in a very effective investigation and CAPA system. And actually, in doing that, they actually tracked the cost savings from that. And they were able to document, I think it was 3 years, $130 million in saving, which isn't chump change. And so they had, several aspects are important to make sure that was a very highly effective quality system, and that actually had real savings so that quality truly can be free if you have those systems that are effective, and it can keep you out of trouble, save you money. And I think the final message would be get the right people for the right job, Keith. If that means bringing great consultants to help you, then it can really pay off for you, and it might even save you $10 billion.
Oh, that's good. So let's hope we can do that for every client, right? So I want to thank James. I want to thank you for your time today. It's been great. I think that there's some great messages there in this podcast, and I think that from a perspective of me working with my people, one of the things that we talk a lot about is just understand why we're doing it, so you don't feel like it's extra work. I think if you build quality into everything you do, I think then it makes it second nature, and you stop worrying about doing extra work, because you're really not doing any extra work. You're just driving that same quality throughout the organization. I think that's something to strive for. So I want to thank you again. Thank the audience for listening, and look forward to talking to you again, James.
Thank you, Keith. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.